So today I work for a venture fund that I helped start called the University Growth Fund. At University Growth Fund, we help students get real world experience investing in venture capital. And as part of that, as you can probably imagine, we have a lot of people that are interested in working in our program. And so every year I get to review literally like hundreds, probably approaching thousands of resumes, and then do hundreds of interviews for what ends up being just a handful of slots in our firm. But through that, over the last 15 years, I've probably reviewed, I don't even know how many thousands of resumes and interviewed hundreds of students. And then once they've come in through our program, I've helped them recraft their resumes so that they can land some amazing jobs. So today, I just wanted to hit on my 5 top tips as you're preparing your resume that I've read through a lot of resume guides and I don't think very many capture a lot of these things. So let's dive into them. The first one is understand the goal of your resume. Your resume has 2 goals, but really one, and that is it needs to get you the interview. So the reason I say this is because, duh, Peter, like that's why I'm writing in a resume is to get the job interview, right? To get the job. But I see these resumes that people submit, and as I'm reading them, it feels like they're writing it because somebody asked them to. They're taking less of a mindset of I want to get the job, I want to get an interview, and more just like, hey, here's a bunch of things that I've done. And so that's my number 1 tip. When you go into this, you need to have the mindset of like, I need to look so freaking impressive on this piece of paper that they just have to interview me, right? Sometimes that means like throwing in some stuff that's maybe even a little clickbaity, right? Where it's like, ooh, this is interesting experience. Maybe I want to bring them in and interview them and learn more about it, right? That's okay. Because what you want is you want to get that interview. And once you've gotten the interview, this is the second thing that your resume does for you, if you've done it right, is it scripts your interview, right? It tells the interviewer exactly the things that you want to be asked about. And so you should be putting into your resume the things that you are most proud about, most impressive sounding, etc., but also things that you could talk about that when you talk about them, it makes you sound even more impressive than what's on the paper. It's also a way to kind of control the interview, right? Like, have you ever gone into an interview and like terrified of what they're going to ask you? Well, if you've like prepped your resume right, it will be a really nice guide and give you a level of confidence and insight into the types of questions they're going to ask even before they know they're going to ask them. All right, number 2, be impressive. I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed people that throw stuff on their resume that just is not very impressive. They're like, yeah, I worked at McDonald's and I flipped burgers, and it's like, look, that's not impressive sounding, right? And not to rag on flipping burgers at McDonald's, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you got to make it sound more impressive, right? So walk in and be like, instead of just telling me what you did, tell me what accomplishment you had. I didn't just flip burgers, I flipped 10,000 burgers, right? Over a 6-month time period or whatever it might be, right? Be and sound impressive in your resume. You need to look amazing. And frankly, like you should kind of stretch the truth just a little bit. You should never lie. 100% do not lie. You will get caught. It will have very bad ramifications for you. Eventually you get caught. So don't lie. But, if you want to take a little bit more extra credit for some accomplishment, then maybe it's definitely known occurred, right? Go for it, right? Make yourself sound impressive, because the reality is you're probably sandbagging your own accomplishments and contributions. There is a line, like I once had one of my former students put on his LinkedIn that he raised our fund. That's a bit of a stretch. I think that would be like breaking that like rule of stretching to breaking point on the truth. Because he didn't, but he could totally have put on his resume, was an active participant in helping fundraise and raise the fund. And look, that might have been a little bit of a stretch because he wasn't like insanely involved, but he was somewhat involved. And because he was somewhat involved, he actually had things that he could talk about in the interview related to it. So It's okay to like stretch the truth a little bit, and or, you know, be generous on the things that you've accomplished, right? If you need to, like, try and generate as many numbers, even if they're rough estimates that are directionally correct, that can be helpful. Do whatever you can to sound as amazing as possible. Be impressive. All right, the third point is good formatting. Now, every industry is going to have different formats of resumes that they find appropriate. Here's the important thing about formatting. You don't want formatting to get in the way of how awesome you are on paper, okay? And what I mean by that is if you're applying for investment banking, for example, there is a very set template for investment banking interviews. You can find it online. I actually even have a video where I go through and I do a makeover of somebody's resume and put it into an investment banking format. Like, there are a lot of tools out there to help you if you want to do investment banking to get the formatting right. The reason that's important is because the people that are interviewing those applicants, they're going to see hundreds, if not thousands of resumes. The last thing that they're going to want to try and do is decipher, like, what does your resume, like, where are the important things that they're looking for that they need to see to know if you're like a good fit for their firm. And the more different your resume is from a formatting perspective, the more lost they're going to be, and they'll just give up super fast and move on to the next one. Part of the reason they give up on you is because they'll be like, hey, this person didn't even do like the basic legwork to use the template that every other person that's applying used. So obviously, like, they don't really know what they're doing here, and they're probably not going to be a good fit anyways. And I know that sounds like, you know, I know that there's like a viewpoint out there that, no, we should be different so you can stand out. Not when it comes to formatting. You really want to stand out through your accomplishments. You want the formatting to blend into the background, right? So that the reader and the recruiter is really focused on you and the things that you have accomplished. So don't let formatting get in the way of your awesomeness. If you're in an industry outside of investment banking, go talk to people that are professionals in that industry and ask them for advice on what kind of templates you should use to make sure that your resume fits and jives with that industry. So for example, like in marketing, you probably want a more dynamic, interesting, creative resume than you do for investment banking, because investment bankers, frankly, aren't that creative compared to like marketing majors. This leads me to the next point, which is remember that the recruiter or the person that's reading your resume is going to read it super fast. So you need to apply the newspaper rule, which is the most important part of the page is the top left and the least important part of the page is the bottom right. You need to approach this like the newspaper rules, which is the most important part of the resume is up top of the page to the left. And the least important part of the resume page is to the bottom on the right. And the reason I say that is when I'm reviewing a resume, I'm looking at the left at the top and I'm working my way down. And I'm going to read most of the stuff on the left, but I'm probably not going to make it to most of the stuff on the right. And I'm definitely not making it to the stuff on the right at the bottom, right? So you need to keep that in mind. So all the really important, cool stuff that makes you sound most impressive needs to go on the left and near the top. That's should be your focus. Because the person reading your resume, they're not going to have time to read every single last word. And in fact, each bullet point, they probably won't even make it through the whole bullet point or the whole list of bullet points. They're probably just going to read the first few words of each bullet point, hoping that you put the most important things at the very top. Because if you didn't, and your most important thing is at the bullet point number 3, you're going to miss out. So get the important stuff at the top, be concise, front load all the impressive stuff up front as much as you can, because that may be the only part that the interviewer reads. And again, you want them to come away impressed and wanting to meet you. And if you take one thing away from this video, I hope it is this one. This is my most important tip, and that is focus on accomplishments, not job descriptions. At the beginning, I talked about how I read a lot of resumes, and I get the impression reading them that people like they're not writing the resume to get the interview. They're writing the resume because it was a requirement, and they're just listing off what they did like in their jobs. That is the wrong mindset. You need to focus on your accomplishments. And so when you're writing out that bullet point, again, it's not like I flipped burgers. That's not an accomplishment. That's a description of your job, right? What you want to do is you want to say, I flipped 5,000 hamburgers in a 6-month time period, right? You've made it concrete, you've added numbers, you've made it an accomplishment, and guess what? You describe what your job was, right? They're going to know, like, hey, this person flipped burgers. That's okay. Sometimes your accomplishments won't have much to do with your day-to-day. That is okay. Nobody freaking cares about the boring stuff you do day in, day out. What they care about are the interesting accomplishments and stories and projects that you did while you were at that firm that had a material impact on the company or the organization that you were working with. Those are the places where you have the opportunity to tell the most interesting of stories. Nobody wants to hear about how you did data entry, for 10 hours a day every day. They want to hear about like the system that you built that allowed you to do data entry 10 times faster than was being done before, because after doing data entry for a while, you figured out there was a better way and you did it, right? That's an interesting story. That should be the bullet point on your resume, not the description of like spent 10 hours a day doing data entry. Focus on your accomplishments. And if you can, those accomplishments should describe your job, but even if they don't, that's okay. You should focus on the accomplishments and the impact that you had on that organization, whether it's by project, if it was a daily thing you did, if it was the sum total of all your accomplishments, if it was a one-off project, whatever it is, everything should be framed as an accomplishment. Because if you do that, you will be and you will sound super impressive and they will want to interview you. I hope this video was helpful. These are my top 5 tips. This is what I go through with all of my students when I give them feedback on their resumes. These are the top 5 things that I always tell them. What do you think? Are there other tips that you've found to be really helpful in preparing a resume? I'd love to see them down in the comments below and interact with you on those. If you have questions on any of these 5 tips, throw them down in the comments too. I'd love to engage and interact with you. And be sure to check out my other video where I do a resume makeover, where I transform a boring resume into a VC job magnet. Thanks.